My father left me everything: the mine, the money, the family name, and a handwritten note with 3 words: "Find Tommy." Tommy was my brother. He died in 1999. At least, that's what everyone told me. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who made me sign 3 separate forms before handing over the envelope. Heavy cream paper, embossed letterhead from a law firm I'd never heard of. Patterson and Associates, Stone Creek, Montana. Stone Creek. I hadn't spoken those words out loud in 25 years. I stood in my Portland apartment, rain streaking the windows, and stared at the return address like it might bite me. My hands were shaking. I'd written 6 true crime bestsellers, interviewed serial killers without flinching, and walked through crime scenes that would make most people vomit. But 2 words on an envelope had reduced me to a trembling mess. The letter was brief, professional, devastating. Dear Mr. Chen, we regret to inform you of the passing of William Michael Chen on the 15th of January 2024. As the sole surviving heir, you are named as the primary beneficiary of his estate, valued at approximately $5.1 million. Per the terms of Mr. Chen's will, your presence is required in Stone Creek, Montana for the formal reading and to fulfill certain conditions of inheritance. Please contact our office within 14 days to schedule this meeting. We offer our sincere condolences for your loss. Regards, Harold Patterson, Esquire. I read it 3 times. Then I poured myself a whiskey and read it again. My father was dead. The man I hadn't spoken to in 25 years. The man I'd fled from in the middle of the night, leaving behind everything I'd ever known. The man whose eyes had held something dark and terrible the last time I'd looked into them. He was dead. And somehow, impossibly, he was still reaching out from the grave to drag me back. I should tell you about my father. William Chen came to Stone Creek in 1972. A 20-year-old immigrant's son with a geology degree and a chip on his shoulder. Within 3 years, he'd bought his first mining claim. Within 10, he owned half the mineral rights in the county. By the time I was born in 1979, Chen Mining Company employed 200 people, and my father was the closest thing Stone Creek had to royalty. Everyone loved Bill Chen. He donated to the schools, sponsored the Little League team, paid for the town's 4th of July fireworks every year. He was a self-made man. The American dream in work boots and a hard hat. At least, that's what everyone saw. I saw something different. I saw the way he'd go quiet at dinner, staring at nothing, his jaw tight with something that looked like rage. I saw the bruises on my mother's arms that she always explained away. I saw the fear in Tommy's eyes whenever Dad raised his voice. Tommy, my older brother, my protector, my best friend. He was 3 years older than me, which meant he took the worst of Dad's temper so I wouldn't have to. He taught me to fish, to fight, to keep my mouth shut when Dad was drinking. He was going to be a teacher, had just finished his education degree when the mine collapsed. The 15th of October, 1999. I remember the date like a scar on my memory. 12 men went into Shaft 7 that morning. None of them came out. The tunnel collapsed at 2:47 p.m., burying them under 1 million tons of rock. Rescue crews worked for 6 days before my father called off the operation. No survivors, he announced, his face carved from stone. Tommy was supposed to be at school that day, student teaching at Stone Creek Elementary, showing 3rd graders how to multiply fractions. Instead, his truck was found at the mine entrance, keys still in the ignition. No one could explain what he was doing there. They never found his body. 3 of the miners were never recovered. The collapse had been too complete, the tunnels too unstable. Tommy was declared dead along with the others. We held a funeral with an empty casket. My mother wept. My father stood rigid and silent, and I watched him. I watched his face during the memorial service. I watched his hands steady, controlled, not a tremor. I watched his eyes when the priest spoke Tommy's name. Nothing. No grief. No guilt. Just nothing. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just drove until Stone Creek was 1,000 miles behind me, and I never looked back. The second page of the letter stopped my heart. It was handwritten. My father's cramped, precise script, I'd recognize it anywhere. 3 words, scrawled at the bottom of an otherwise blank sheet. Find Tommy. I dropped the paper like it had burned me. Find Tommy. Tommy was dead. I'd attended his funeral. I'd watched them lower an empty casket into the ground. I'd grieved him for 25 years, the brother who died too young. The protector I couldn't save. Find Tommy. What the hell did that mean? My phone rang. Unknown number. Montana area code. I answered without thinking. Number 4. I will Dahmer, Montana. Mr. Chen? A woman's voice. Professional, but warm. This is Jennifer, from Patterson and Associates. I'm calling to confirm you received our letter. I received it. Wonderful. Mr. Patterson would like to schedule the will, reading at your earliest convenience. As stated in the letter, there are certain conditions. What conditions? A pause. I'm not authorized to discuss the specifics over the phone, Mr. Chen, but I can tell you that your presence in Stone Creek is required for a minimum of 30 days to fulfill the terms of inheritance. 30 days. Yes, sir. And there's a 60-day window from the date of the letter to begin that period. After that, the estate defaults to an alternate beneficiary. 60 days. 30 days in Stone Creek, the place I'd sworn never to return to. Who's the alternate beneficiary? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. The Stone Creek Community Development Fund. It's administered by the town council, Frank Morrison. I didn't need to ask. I knew Frank had been on the council for decades. Dad's oldest friend. His foreman during the mine's peak years. The man who'd stood beside him at Tommy's funeral with the same empty expression. If I didn't go back, Frank Morrison would control $5 million of my family's money. Mr. Chen? Are you still there? I looked at the handwritten note. 3 words that made no sense. 3 words that changed everything. Find Tommy. I'll be there Monday, I said. The drive from Portland to Stone Creek takes 11 hours if you follow the speed limit. I made it in 9. I told myself I wasn't rushing. I told myself the extra coffee and the barely legal highway speeds were just efficiency, not desperation. But somewhere around the Idaho border, I stopped pretending. I needed answers. And the only place to find them was the town I'd spent half my life running from. Stone Creek announced itself with a rusted sign that hadn't changed since 1985. Welcome to Stone Creek, Montana. Population 5,200. Gateway to the Rockies. Someone had spray painted over the population number. The new figure, scrawled in faded red. 1,900. The town had shrunk, collapsed in on itself like the mine that had built it. I drove down Main Street at 20 miles an hour, cataloging the damage. Morrison's hardware boarded up. The Cascade Diner windows dark, for lease sign yellowing in the glass. Stone Creek Savings and Loan converted to a pawn shop. The movie theater where Tommy took me to see Jurassic Park in '93. Now a church. Its marquee advertising Sunday services and Wednesday bingo. 25 years. That's how long it takes for a town to die. The few people on the sidewalk stopped and stared as I passed. A woman with a grocery bag. An old man on a bench. 2 teenagers smoking outside the gas station. They watched my rental car like it was a hearse rolling through a funeral. They knew who I was. In a town this small, they always knew. I pulled into the parking lot of the only motel that still appeared operational, the Pine Ridge Inn, a sad collection of cabins that had been outdated when I was a kid. The woman at the front desk was 60-something, with steel gray hair and glasses that magnified her eyes to unsettling proportions. David Chen, she said before I could open my mouth. Not a question. That's right. Heard you were coming. She slid a registration card across the counter. Whole town's been talking about it since your daddy passed. Didn't think you'd actually show though. Most folks figured you'd just take the money and run. Again. The word hung in the air between us. Again, "I need to be here for the will reading," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I know what you need." She took my credit card without looking at it. "Room 7, end of the row. Checkout's at 11. She paused, her magnified eyes fixed on mine. "You know, your brother was a good man. Better than most around here. Shame what happened to him." "Yes," I said. "It was. A lot of folks still remember that day. October 15th, 99. Some wounds don't heal, Mr. Chen. Some wounds just keep bleeding." I took my key and left without responding. There was nothing to say. The Chen family home sat at the end of Maple Avenue, a Victorian mansion that had once been the grandest house in town. My great-grandfather built it in 1920, back when the Chen Mining Company was just a dream, and the mountains were full of promise. 4 generations of my family had lived and died within those walls. Now it looked like a ghost. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung crooked, and the wraparound porch sagged in the middle like a broken spine. The garden my mother had tended so carefully, roses, hydrangeas, Japanese maples, had become a jungle of weeds and dead branches. The windows stared down at me like empty eyes. I sat in my rental car for 10 minutes before I could make myself get out. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into my childhood. The smell hit me first, dust and mildew and something older, something that might have been memory itself. The furniture was covered in white sheets, transforming the living room into a landscape of ghosts. My mother's piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Above the fireplace, a family portrait I'd forgotten existed. Mom, Dad, Tommy, and me, circa 1990. We were all smiling. Even Dad. I walked through the rooms like a man in a dream. The kitchen, where Mom made Sunday pancakes. The study, where Dad reviewed mining reports late into the night. The staircase, where Tommy once carried me after I broke my ankle falling off my bike. Tommy's room was exactly as he'd left it. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, time had stopped on the 14th of October, in 1999, the last night my brother slept in this house. His bed was made with military precision, the way Dad had taught us. His teaching textbooks were stacked on the desk, post-it notes marking important pages. A poster of Michael Jordan hung above the headboard, edges curling with age. On the nightstand, a framed photograph. Tommy and me at the county fair, summer of '98. He had his arm around my shoulders. We were both laughing at something I couldn't remember. I picked up the frame. My hands were shaking again. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I never came back. I'm sorry I couldn't." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. A man stood in the doorway, tall, heavy-set, with a face like weathered granite, and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Frank Morrison. 25 years older, 30 pounds heavier, but unmistakable. David Chen. His voice was gravel and ice. "Didn't think I'd see you back here. Figured you'd learned your lesson about poking around where you don't belong. Frank." I kept my voice steady. "This is my family's house. Is it?" He stepped into the room, his bulk filling the doorway. "Seems to me you gave up any claim to this family when you ran off in the middle of the night. Left your mother to grieve alone. Left your daddy to bury your brother without his only living son. I had my reasons. Everybody's got reasons." He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of tobacco and something sour. "Here's the thing, David. Your daddy's dead now. The past is buried. Everybody in this town has moved on." His eyes locked onto mine. "Everybody except you. My father's will. Your father's will is a piece of paper. Papers can be contested. Conditions can be unmet." He smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. 30 days is a long time, David. Lot can happen in 30 days. Accidents, misunderstandings, people changing their minds about what they thought they saw, what they thought they knew. He was close enough now that I could see the broken capillaries in his nose, the yellow stains on his teeth. Is that a threat, Frank? That's advice. Free of charge. He turned and walked toward the door, then paused. Your brother stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Asked questions. Nobody wanted answered. Look where it got him. He left without another word. I listened to his footsteps descend the stairs, cross the porch, fade into silence. I looked at the photograph in my hands. Tommy's smile. Tommy's arm around my shoulders. Find Tommy. Frank Morrison knew something. The whole town knew something, and I was going to find out what. Patterson and Associates occupied a narrow brick building on the corner of Main and 3rd, sandwiched between an empty storefront and a barber shop that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The brass nameplate on the door was polished to a shine, one of the few things in Stone Creek that still seemed to care about appearances. I arrived 15 minutes early. Harold Patterson was already waiting. He was smaller than I expected, mid-60s. Bald, with wire-rimmed glasses, and a handshake that felt like gripping a dead fish. His office smelled of old paper and older secrets, the walls lined with leather-bound law books that probably hadn't been opened since the Clinton administration. Mr. Chen. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult. Let's just get through it. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. Before we begin, I should inform you that another party has requested to be present for the reading. As a potential alternate beneficiary, he has the legal right, Frank Morrison. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. You've already spoken with Mr. Morrison? He paid me a visit last night. Made his interests very clear. I see. Patterson shuffled papers on his desk, avoiding my eyes. Well, he should be arriving shortly. In the meantime, perhaps you'd like some coffee. The door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Frank Morrison settled into the chair beside me like a king claiming his throne. He was wearing a suit today, ill-fitting. The fabric straining across his shoulders, and his thinning gray hair was slicked back with too much product. He smelled like aftershave and ambition. David. He nodded at me. All false courtesy. Glad you decided to stick around. 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 Wouldn't miss it. Patterson cleared his throat. Gentlemen, shall we begin? The will was 17 pages long. Patterson read every word in a monotone that could have put an insomniac to sleep. Most of it was standard legal boilerplate estate administration, tax provisions, charitable bequests to organizations I'd never heard of. Then came the conditions. To my son, David Michael Chen, Patterson read, his voice taking on a more careful quality. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including but not limited to the Chen Mining Company and all associated assets, the family residence at 847 Maple Avenue, the mountain property known as Chen Cabin, located at coordinates 45.8721 degrees north, 112.4532 degrees west, and all liquid assets held in accounts at First National Bank of Montana, totaling approximately $2,800,000. Frank shifted in his seat. I kept my face neutral. However, Patterson continued, this inheritance is contingent upon the following conditions being met within 60 days of this reading. Here it comes. Condition 1. David must establish residence in the Chen family home for a minimum of 30 consecutive days, beginning no later than 14 days from the date of this reading. 30 days. In that house, with those memories. Condition 2. David must locate and arrange proper burial services for the 3 miners whose remains were never recovered from the October 1999 collapse of Shaft. 7. Specifically, Miguel Rodriguez, Joseph Whitehorse, and Patrick Sullivan. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father wanted me to dig up the past. Literally. Condition 3. Patterson paused, removing his glasses to clean them. A stalling tactic. Condition 3 is unusual. Read it, I said. He replaced his glasses and looked at the page like it might explode. Condition 3. David must locate and verify the current status of Thomas Chen, and if living, ensure his well-being and freedom. The room went silent. Frank Morrison stopped breathing. I turned to look at him. His face had gone pale beneath the weathered tan, his eyes fixed on Patterson with something that looked very much like fear. "That's impossible," Frank said, his voice too loud for the small room. "Thomas Chen died in the mine collapse. His death certificate was issued in November 1999. This condition is legally unenforceable. The will is quite specific, Mr. Morrison." Patterson's voice was steady, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Chen, Sr. was very clear that this condition must be attempted in good faith. Whether or not Thomas Chen is ultimately found to be deceased, David must conduct a thorough search and document his findings." "This is insane." Frank stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Bill Chen was clearly not in his right mind when he wrote this. I'll be contesting this will on grounds of mental incapacity. Mr. Chen's mental faculties were thoroughly evaluated by 3 independent physicians prior to the drafting of this will," Patterson said calmly. "All 3 certified him as fully competent. I have their reports on file." Frank's face contorted through several emotions: rage, fear, calculation, before settling into something cold and controlled. "We'll see about that." He turned to me, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You're wasting your time, David. Tommy's dead. Has been for 25 years. All you're going to do is hurt a lot of people by digging up old wounds. Maybe some wounds need to be reopened," I said. "Maybe they never healed properly in the first place." He stared at me for a long moment, then stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Patterson waited until the sound of Frank's truck faded before speaking again. "There's one more thing. Mr. Chen." He opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Your father instructed me to give you this separately. He was very specific that it not be opened until after the formal reading, and only in your presence alone." The envelope was thick, heavy. My name was written on the front in my father's handwriting. I tore it open. Inside were 3 items. The first was a key old, iron, the kind that might fit a padlock or a basement door. The second was a photograph I'd never seen before. Tommy, standing outside what looked like a cabin in the woods, unsmiling, thinner than I remembered. The photograph was dated. My blood turned to ice. The 15th of June, 2015. The third item was a handwritten note, longer than the one in the original letter. "David, if you're reading this, I'm finally dead, and the secret I've carried for 25 years dies with me unless you're brave enough to dig it up. I did something unforgivable. I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting the family, protecting you, protecting the town. I was wrong. I was a coward and a monster. Tommy is alive. Or he was, the last time I saw him. He's at the cabin, not the main building, but underneath it. I built that place to hide my sins, David, and my greatest sin was what I did to your brother. Find him. Free him. Tell the truth." I was too afraid to tell. "The key opens the bunker door. The coordinates are in the official will. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But Tommy does. He's been waiting 25 years for someone to save him. Don't let him wait any longer. Your father." I read the note 3 times. Then I walked out of Patterson's office, got in my car, and drove toward the mountains. I made it 12 miles up the mountain road before I had to pull over. My hands were shaking too badly to grip the steering wheel. My breath came in ragged gasps that fogged the windshield. The photograph sat on the passenger seat. Tommy's face staring up at me, older, thinner, haunted, dated, 16 years after we buried an empty casket. 25 years. My brother had been alive for 25 years while I wrote books about other people's tragedies, while I won awards and gave interviews and built a career on uncovering the truth. The truth had been waiting in a bunker 40 miles from where I grew up, and I never knew. I punched the dashboard until my knuckles split. Then I sat there, bleeding and gasping, trying to remember how to think. The rational part of my brain, the part that had written 6 true crime books, that had learned to separate emotion from evidence, slowly reasserted itself. I couldn't go to the cabin now. Not alone. Not without knowing what I was walking into. Frank Morrison had been terrified at the will reading. That meant he knew. The sheriff probably knew too. God knows who else in this town had helped my father keep his secret for a quarter century. If I drove up to that cabin alone, I might not drive back down. I needed allies. I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made my move. I turned the car around and headed back to Stone Creek. The Cascade Diner wasn't as dead as it had looked from the outside. A handful of customers occupied the worn vinyl booths, retirees nursing coffee. A young mother trying to quiet a fussy toddler. A man in a trucker cap reading yesterday's newspaper. And in the back corner, a woman sitting alone with a laptop and a stack of file folders. She looked up when I walked in. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, sharp brown eyes that assessed me in a single glance. She was pretty in a fierce, no-nonsense way, the kind of woman who had stopped caring about pretty a long time ago. I knew her, or I had known her. Once, David Chen. She closed her laptop slowly. I heard you were back. Sarah Martinez. I slid into the booth across from her without waiting for an invitation. It's been a while. Thanks for watching. And never one never and see you nay. 25 years. Her voice was flat. You left without saying goodbye. I left without saying goodbye to everyone. Yeah, but I wasn't everyone. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. Ancient history. What do you want? I noticed the folders now. Manila envelopes, some new, some yellowed with age. Newspaper clippings peeked out from the edges. Photographs, typed reports. What is all this? I asked. She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. My investigation. 12 men died in that mine, David. My husband was one of them. I felt the words like a punch to the gut. Miguel Rodriguez. I saw his name in the will conditions. Miguel Rodriguez Martinez. She corrected me, her voice tight. We got married 6 months before the collapse. 6 months. We were trying for a baby. She laughed, bitterly. I was actually relieved when I found out I wasn't pregnant. Can you imagine? Relieved that I wouldn't have to raise his child alone. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Don't. She held up a hand. I didn't tell you that for sympathy. I told you so. You'd understand why I've spent the last 25 years trying to prove what really happened in that mine. I leaned forward. And what did happen? She glanced around the diner, then lowered her voice. The official report said it was a geological anomaly, an unexpected fault line that caused a structural collapse. Act of God, basically. Convenient, right? Can't sue God, but you don't believe that. I'm a journalist, David. I believe evidence. She pulled a folder from the stack and slid it across the table. 3 weeks before the collapse, a safety inspector named Robert Henley filed a report flagging serious concerns about Shaft 7, inadequate support structures, water seepage weakening the walls. He recommended immediate shutdown for reinforcement. I opened the folder. The report was there. Official letterhead, detailed technical language, a bright red stamp that said urgent. This should have closed the mine, I said. It should have. But it didn't. Sarah pulled out another document. This is the version that made it into the official files. Same inspector, same date, same letterhead, but look at the conclusion. I compared the 2 reports. The second one was nearly identical until the final paragraph, which had been completely rewritten. Instead of recommending shutdown, it certified Shaft 7 as meeting all current safety standards. Someone falsified the report, I said. Someone with enough power to make an official document disappear and replace it with a forgery. Sarah's eyes met mine. Someone like your father. I thought about the letter in my pocket. The confession. The photograph dated 2015. There's more, I said quietly. A lot more. What do you mean? I hesitated. Sarah had been my high school girlfriend. We'd lost our virginity to each other in the back of her father's pickup truck. I'd loved her once, or thought I had. Then I'd abandoned her along with everyone else. Could I trust her now? After everything, I looked at the folders. 25 years of investigation. 25 years of searching for the truth about her husband's death. She dedicated her life to this, while I'd been running from it. She deserved to know. I pulled out the photograph and the letter and laid them on the table. My father left me more than money, I said. He left me a confession. Sarah picked up the photograph first. Her face went pale. This is Tommy. But the date, June 2015. 16 years after he supposedly died in that mine. She read the letter in silence. When she finished, her hands were trembling. A bunker, she whispered. He kept your brother in a bunker for 25 years. Tommy saw something. That's my guess. He saw what really happened. Or he found proof of what Dad did. And Dad couldn't let him talk. Sarah looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. So, what are you going to do? I'm going to find my brother. I'm going to get him out. And then I'm going to burn this whole conspiracy to the ground. I paused. But I can't do it alone. Frank Morrison already threatened me. The sheriff is probably in on it. Half this town might be complicit. And you want my help. You've been investigating for 25 years. You know things I don't. You have evidence I need. I held her gaze. And you deserve to know what really happened to Miguel. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she gathered her folders and stood. Not here, she said. Too many ears. My place is 10 minutes outside town. She looked down at me with something that might have been the beginning of trust. Follow me, David. It's time you saw what I found. Sarah's house was a small cabin tucked into the pines, invisible from the main road. The kind of place you'd never find unless you knew exactly where to look. I understood why she'd chosen it in Stone Creek. Privacy was survival. The inside was chaos organized into purpose. Every wall was covered with maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by colored string. A conspiracy theorist's fever dream, except Sarah wasn't crazy. She was methodical. She was patient. And she had 25 years of evidence to prove it. Welcome to my obsession, she said, closing the door behind us. Coffee? Something stronger, if you have it. She poured us both whiskey from a bottle that looked older than our failed relationship. I took mine and stood before the largest wall, a timeline stretching from 1995 to present day. Every major event in Stone Creek's history, mapped and annotated. You did all this yourself? Who else was going to do it? She stood beside me, arms crossed. The sheriff? The mayor? The newspaper that your father's advertising money kept afloat for 30 years? She shook her head. After Miguel died, I tried going through official channels, filed complaints, requested investigations, contacted state agencies. You know what I got? Nothing. Worse than nothing. I got warned. Sheriff Tanner pulled me over one night, told me I was driving erratically, which was bullshit. I hadn't had a drop and suggested that a young widow might want to focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on the past. Her jaw tightened. That's when I knew. Whatever happened in that mine, whoever was responsible, the whole system was designed to protect them. I studied the timeline. The 15th of October, 1999, the collapse was marked in red, with dozens of threads connecting it to names, dates, and documents. Walk me through it, I said. Everything you know. Sarah moved to the wall, tracing the connections with her finger. It starts here. August 1999. Chen Mining Company signs a contract with Montana Power and Light to deliver 15,000 tons of copper ore by November 1st. Huge contract worth about $2 million. Problem is, Shaft 7 is behind schedule. The ore is there, but extraction is slower than projected. So Dad pushed the workers harder, pushed them into a death trap. She pointed to a cluster of documents. September 23rd. Robert Henley, the safety inspector, files his report. Shaft 7 is compromised. Water damage. Unstable supports. The works. He recommends immediate shutdown, minimum 6 weeks for reinforcement, which would have blown the deadline. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. She pulled down a photograph, a grainy image of 2 men shaking hands outside what looked like a government building. 3 days after Henley files his report, he meets with your father and Frank Morrison at the county assessor's office. No official record of the meeting. I only know about it because the assessor's secretary mentioned it to me years later, after she'd retired and moved to Boise. What happened at the meeting? Henley walked in with a report that would shut down the mine. He walked out with a new report that gave it a clean bill of health and a check for $50,000 deposited into an account in his wife's maiden name. I felt sick. You have proof of the payment? Bank records. Took me 8 years to get them, and I had to call in favors from a friend at the IRS, but yes. She pointed to another document. Henley died in 2007. Car accident. Single vehicle. Late at night. On a straight road he'd driven 1,000 times. Convenient. Very. Sarah moved to another section of the wall. After the collapse, your father controlled the narrative. Sentiment. He donated money to the victims' families, enough to discourage lawsuits, not enough to raise suspicions. He funded the official investigation, which meant he essentially paid people to investigate themselves, and anyone who asked too many questions got warned. Like you, or worse. She pulled down another photograph. James, Whitehorse. His father Joseph died in the collapse. James was 19 at the time, angry as hell. Convinced it wasn't an accident, he started his own investigation. What happened to him? DUI arrest in 2003. Lost his license, lost his job, lost his family, became the town drunk. Her voice softened. He's still here. Lives in a trailer outside town. Most people think he's crazy. I think he's the only other person in Stone Creek who never stopped looking for the truth. I stared at the wall, the names, the dates, the money trails, the suspicious deaths. What about Tommy? I asked. Did you ever suspect he was alive? Sarah hesitated. There were rumors. In the first few years after the collapse, some people claimed they'd seen him on the mountain, in the woods near your family's cabin. But your father always dismissed it as grief hallucinations, people wanting to see what wasn't there. She looked at me. I never believed he was dead, David. The body was never found. And Tommy was smart, too smart to be in that mine by accident. You think he discovered something? I think he found proof of what your father was planning. And I think your father couldn't let him talk. She pointed to a section of the wall I hadn't noticed, a smaller cluster, separate from the rest. This is everything I have on Tommy. Sightings, theories, questions I could never answer. I moved closer. There were photographs of the Chen cabin, taken from a distance. Notes about supply deliveries, groceries, medical equipment, things that didn't make sense for an empty property, and a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Henry Whitmore. Who's that? Sarah's expression darkened. Town doctor. Retired now, but he was practicing in '99. He was the one who signed Tommy's death certificate based on presumed death, since no body was recovered. You think he's involved? I think he's been making trips to your family's cabin every month for the past 25 years. I have photographs. She pulled out a folder and handed it to me. I could never figure out why. The cabin's supposed to be empty. Your father only went there a few times a year. I looked at the photographs. Dr. Whitmore's car, parked outside the cabin. Dates spanning decades. Medical bags visible through the window. He's been keeping Tommy alive, I said quietly. Medical care. That's why Dad needed him. That's what I'm starting to think. Sarah's voice was grim, which means Dr. Whitmore knows everything. He's been complicit for 25 years. I set down the folder. Can we trust him? Trust him? No. Use him? Maybe. She finished her whiskey. A man who's spent 25 years living with that kind of guilt, he might be looking for a way out. A chance to make things right before he dies. I looked at the wall. At 25 years of evidence, pain, and obsession, what's our next move? I asked. We talked to Dr. Whitmore. Tomorrow, before anyone can warn him you're asking questions. Sarah met my eyes. But David, if Tommy's really alive, if he's been in that bunker for 25 years, we need to be prepared for what we find. I nodded slowly. I know, but I didn't know. Not really. Nothing could prepare me for what was coming. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling I'd memorized decades ago, listening to the old house creak and groan around me. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow held secrets. At 3:47 a.m., I heard glass shatter downstairs. I was out of bed before my brain fully processed the sound. Grabbing the baseball bat I'd found in Tommy's closet, aluminum, Louisville Slugger, the one he'd used to hit the winning run in the '98 county championship, I moved down the hallway in bare feet, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound. The kitchen light was on. I hadn't left it that way. I pressed myself against the wall, bat raised, and peered around the corner. The back door was open, cold mountain air streaming through the broken window pane. The kitchen had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, cabinets emptied, contents scattered across the floor. And standing in the middle of the chaos, flashlight in hand, was a figure dressed entirely in black. "Stop right there," I said, stepping into the doorway. The figure spun. I caught a glimpse of a ski mask, dark eyes, gloved hands. Then, the flashlight hit me square in the face, blinding me. By the time I recovered, the intruder was gone, footsteps crunching through the broken glass and disappearing into the night. I ran to the door but saw nothing. Just darkness and trees and the distant silhouette of the mountains against the stars. They'd taken my father's letter, the photograph of Tommy, the key to the bunker, everything. I called Sarah at first light. "They know," I said, pacing the destroyed kitchen. "Someone broke in last night, took all the evidence Dad left me. Are you hurt?" "No." "But the letter, the photo, the key, it's all gone." Silence on the line. Then, Frank Morrison. Has to be. He's the only one who knew what was in that envelope. Patterson knew too. Harold Patterson is 73 years old and afraid of his own shadow. He's not climbing through windows at 4 in the morning. Sarah's voice was tense. "This is bad. David, they're escalating. Fast. I know. You need to report this. Official record. Even if the sheriff is dirty, you need documentation. The sheriff is definitely dirty, which is why you're not going to report it to him." She paused. "There's a new deputy, Lisa Crowfeather, transferred in from Billings about 5 years ago. She's not local, not connected to any of the old families. I've been watching her. I think she might be clean." "You think? It's the best we've got. Meet me at the station in an hour. I'll introduce you." The Stone Creek Sheriff's Department occupied a squat concrete building that looked more like a bunker than a law enforcement facility. Appropriate, given what I now knew about the people who ran it. Sarah was waiting outside, 2 coffees in hand. She passed one to me, without a word. "Tanner's out," she said quietly. "Some kind of meeting at the county seat. Won't be back until tonight. Lisa's working the desk." We walked in together. Deputy Lisa Crowfeather looked up from her computer as we entered. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a braid, and eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was crisp, her badge polished, her expression professionally neutral. "Sarah." She nodded. "Mr. Chen, I was wondering when you'd show up. You know who I am? Everyone knows who you are. The prodigal son, returned to claim his inheritance." She leaned back in her chair, Word around town is you're asking questions that make certain people uncomfortable. Word travels fast. It's a small town. Her eyes flicked to the bruise on my arm. I'd caught it on the doorframe during the break-in. What happened? Someone broke into my house last night. Ransacked the place. Stole personal documents. Lisa's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. You want to file a report? Would it matter? It would to me. She stood, grabbing a clipboard. Let's take a walk, Mr. Chen. Interview rooms got better coffee than this swill. The interview room was small, windowless, and equipped with a recording device that Lisa made a point of turning off. You want to tell me what's really going on? She asked, closing the door. I looked at Sarah. She nodded. For the next 20 minutes, I told Lisa everything. The will conditions, the Find Tommy note, my father's confession, the photograph dated 2015, Sarah's investigation, the falsified safety reports, the bribed inspector, the break-in, all of it. When I finished, Lisa sat back in her chair. Let me make sure I understand, she said slowly. You're telling me that your father, the most respected businessman in Stone Creek history, deliberately caused a mine collapse that killed 12 men, that he then imprisoned his own son for 25 years to cover it up, that the sheriff, the town council chair, and possibly the local doctor have all been complicit, and that now they're trying to intimidate you into leaving town before you can expose the truth. That's exactly what I'm telling you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. I've been in this town for 5 years, she said. 5 years of watching Sheriff Tanner run this department like his personal kingdom. 5 years of cases that don't add up. Investigations that go nowhere. Evidence that disappears. She leaned forward. I knew something was rotten here. I just didn't know how deep it went. So you believe us? Sarah asked. I believe something is very wrong with this town. Whether your story is exactly right. She shrugged. That's what investigations are for. And detenses. And Conamator, Hosan WTO. Tanner will shut you down, I said. The moment he finds out you're looking into this, Tanner doesn't need to know. Lisa's eyes met mine, steady and fierce. Not yet. Not until we have evidence he can't bury. She pulled out a notepad. You said your father left a key. Where is it now? Stolen. Last night. Then we need another way into that bunker. She turned to Sarah. You said you've been photographing the cabin. Do you have recent surveillance? Anything that shows access points? Security measures? Sarah nodded. I can get you everything I have. Good. We move carefully, we document everything, and we don't trust anyone in this department except each other. Welcome to Stone Creek's smallest conspiracy, Mr. Chen. Population 3. I shook her hand. Call me David. David. She nodded. Now, let's go find your brother. After Lisa left to start her own quiet investigation, I returned to the family home alone. Sarah offered to come with me, but I needed solitude. The break-in had violated something more than just a house. It had violated the last physical connection I had to my past. I spent the morning cleaning up the destruction, sweeping broken glass, returning scattered belongings to drawers that would never close properly again, trying to restore order to chaos, as if that were possible. It was in my mother's sewing room that I found it. The room had been Mom's sanctuary, a small space off the master bedroom, filled with fabric bolts, thread spools, and a vintage Singer machine she'd inherited from her grandmother. Dad had never set foot in here. He'd called it women's business and left her alone. The intruders had searched it, of course. Drawers pulled out, fabric scattered. The sewing machine knocked onto its side. But they'd been looking for documents, letters, obvious hiding places. They hadn't thought to check inside the machine itself. I was writing the Singer when I heard something shift inside the base. A hollow sound. I turned the machine over and found a panel that didn't quite fit a false bottom, barely visible unless you knew to look. Inside was an envelope, pale blue, the color Mom always used for personal correspondence. My name was written on the front, in her delicate cursive. David. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest David, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've finally come home. I've imagined this moment for years, wondering if you'd find this letter, wondering if I should have given it to you directly. But I was always too afraid. Afraid of your father. Afraid of what the truth would do to you. Afraid, most of all, of what I helped to hide. I need to tell you about Tommy. The official story that he died in the mine collapse is a lie. I've known this since the 16th of October, 1999, the day after the disaster. I woke in the middle of the night to find your father in the kitchen, covered in dirt and blood. His hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold his coffee cup. When I asked him what happened, he told me never to ask again. He told me Tommy was taken care of. He told me that if I loved our family, I would forget I ever had a second son. I should have gone to the police. I should have demanded answers. I should have protected my child. Instead, I did nothing. I buried an empty casket. I accepted condolences from neighbors who didn't know they were mourning a lie. I watched you drive away that night, yes. I saw you leave, David. For years, I told myself Tommy must be dead. Your father wouldn't keep him alive. What would be the point? But then, I started noticing things. Grocery deliveries to the cabin that no one was supposed to be using. Medical supplies disappearing from our bathroom cabinet. Your father's monthly trips to check on the property that lasted exactly 4 hours every time. I followed him once. In 2008, I borrowed Mary Sullivan's car so he wouldn't recognize me, and I followed him up the mountain road. He parked at the cabin and walked around to the back. There was a door there built into the hillside, half hidden by brush. He went inside and didn't come out for 2 hours. I never told anyone what I saw. I was too afraid. And by then, I'd been complicit for so long that confession felt impossible. How do you admit that you let your own son rot in a hole in the ground for almost a decade? How do you look your remaining child in the eye and explain that kind of cowardice? You couldn't. So I didn't. David, I don't know if Tommy is still alive. By the time you read this, it might be too late. But if there's any chance at all, please try to find him. Please try to undo what your father and I did through our silence and our fear. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I'm asking you to be braver than I ever was. I'm asking you to save your brother, if he can still be saved. The key to the bunker door is hidden in your father's study, behind the photograph of the mine's opening day. There's a false panel in the frame. Your father never knew I found it. I love you, David. I loved Tommy. I loved our family, even as I watched it destroy itself. Please forgive me. Or if you can't, please at least remember that I tried to leave you the truth. All my love, forever. Mom. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat on the floor of my mother's sewing room and wept. For Tommy, imprisoned in darkness while the world moved on. For Mom, trapped in her own prison of fear and guilt. For Dad, twisted by whatever darkness had driven him to such monstrous acts. For myself, the son who ran away and never looked back. When the tears finally stopped, I stood and walked to my father's study. The photograph was exactly where Mom described a black and white image of the Chen Mine's opening day, 1978. Dad in the center, young and proud, surrounded by workers who would later die because of his greed. I removed the frame from the wall. The back panel came away easily, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a key. Iron, old, identical to the one that had been stolen. The original was a copy. My father had kept the real key here all along. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, the weight of 25 years of secrets, the weight of my brother's life. I'm coming, Tommy, I whispered. I'm finally coming. Dr. Henry Whitmore, found me before I could find him. I was sitting on the porch of the family home that evening, turning the iron key over in my hands, when an old Buick pulled into the driveway. The man who emerged was stooped and gray, his once sturdy frame diminished by age, and something heavier guilt, maybe, or the weight of secrets carried too long. He walked toward me slowly, each step deliberate, like a condemned man approaching the gallows. When he reached the porch steps, he stopped and looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. David Chen. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I've been waiting 25 years for this conversation. His voice. Dr. Whitmore, you know who I am. I know what you've done. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Then he nodded slowly and lowered himself onto the porch step, his joints creaking in protest. I suppose you do. Or you've figured out enough to hate me. He stared out at the darkening sky. I've hated myself for longer than you've been gone. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. In my experience, guilty people couldn't stand silence. It forced them to fill the void with confession. Whitmore lasted about 30 seconds. Your father came to me on October 16th, 1999, he began, the day after the collapse. He was frantic, desperate. I'd never seen Bill Chen desperate before. He told me there had been an accident at the cabin. Someone was hurt. He needed medical attention, but he couldn't take them to a hospital. Tommy. I didn't know it was Tommy. Not at first. Whitmore's hands trembled in his lap. Bill drove me up the mountain in the middle of the night, blindfolded me for the last mile, said it was for my own protection. When he finally let me see, we were standing in front of a door built into the hillside. A bunker. What did you find inside? Whitmore closed his eyes. A room, maybe 15 by 15 feet. Concrete walls, no windows, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, a cot in the corner, a bucket for waste. His voice cracked. And Tommy, chained to the wall by his ankle, beaten half to death, barely conscious. The key bit into my palm. I hadn't realized I was squeezing it. He'd found something, Whitmore continued. That's what Bill said. Tommy had discovered proof that the mine collapse was deliberate documents, recordings. Something that would have destroyed everything Bill had built. He was going to the state attorney general. Bill intercepted him at the mine entrance. So instead of killing him, Dad decided to bury him alive. Bill said killing his own son was a line he couldn't cross, as if imprisonment for a lifetime was somehow more merciful. Whitmore laughed bitterly. I think the truth was simpler. Bill wanted leverage, control. As long as Tommy was alive, he could be used, threatened, and Bill could tell himself he wasn't a murderer, just a monster. Yes, Whitmore met my eyes for the first time, and I helped him. For 25 years, I helped him. At first, fear. Bill made it very clear what would happen if I refused or talked. He had connections everywhere. The sheriff, the county commissioners, the state legislature. He could destroy my practice, my family, my life. He showed me photographs of my daughter at her college campus in Bozeman, my granddaughter at her elementary school playground. Whitmore's voice shook. He didn't have to say anything more. So you kept Tommy alive. I visited every month, treated infections, monitored his health, administered medications to keep him stable. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. I kept records, everything I did, everything I observed. I told myself it was medical documentation, but really it was evidence. Evidence I was too cowardly to use. He handed me the notebook. I opened it to find page after page of meticulous notes. Dates, vital signs, treatments, observations spanning 25 years. Tommy's condition? I asked. Physically, he's deteriorated. Muscle atrophy from lack of movement. Vitamin deficiencies, despite the supplements I provided. His eyesight has weakened. The bunker is dark most of the time to conserve generator fuel. He has chronic respiratory issues from the poor ventilation, but he's alive. As of my last visit, 3 months ago, just before your father died, Whitmore's face crumpled. Bill's death was sudden heart attack in his sleep. He never told anyone else about Tommy. When I realized what had happened, I panicked. Without Bill maintaining the generator, providing supplies, Tommy's been alone for 3 months. I wanted to go to him, to free him, but Frank Morrison has been watching me since the funeral. I think he knows I'm involved, even if he doesn't know the details. I couldn't risk leading him to Tommy. Whitmore grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. But you can, David. You can get to him. You have the legal right to access that property, and you have something I never had. What's that? Nothing left to lose. His eyes bored into mine. Frank Morrison took everything from you the moment he broke into your house. The sheriff is his puppet. The whole town is built on your father's lies. You can't go back to your old life, not now, not knowing what you know. He released my arm. So burn it all down, save your brother, and let the truth finally see daylight. I looked at the notebook in my hands. 25 years of suffering, documented in clinical detail. The bunker, I said. How do I get Tommy out safely? What's his condition really like? Fragile. Moving him will be risky. He hasn't walked more than a few steps in decades. You'll need medical equipment, a vehicle that can handle the mountain roads, and you'll need to move fast. Frank Morrison isn't stupid. The moment he realizes you're heading for that cabin, he'll try to stop you. Let him try. Whitmore stood slowly, his confession complete. I know sorry isn't enough. I know nothing I say can undo what I've been part of. But, for what it's worth, I hope you find him in time. I hope Tommy can forgive me. I hope. Don't. I cut him off. You don't get to hope, Dr. Whitmore. You get to help. And after this is over, you get to face whatever consequences come. He nodded, accepting the judgment. Fair enough. One more thing. Is there anyone else? Anyone else who knows about Tommy? Whitmore hesitated. Frank Morrison suspects. Sheriff Tanner probably knows pieces. But the only other person who knew everything was my father. And now you. He turned to leave, then paused. The generator should have enough fuel for another week, maybe 2. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I watched him drive away, then pulled out my phone and called Sarah. Tomorrow, I said. We go to the cabin tomorrow. We left before dawn. Sarah drove. She knew the mountain roads better than anyone. Lisa sat in the passenger seat, her service weapon holstered but visible, her eyes scanning every shadow. I was in the back with Dr. Whitmore's medical notebook, a first aid kit, blankets, water, and a flashlight powerful enough to cut through solid darkness. None of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. The road to Chen Cabin wound through 12 miles of dense pine forest, climbing steadily into the mountains. My father had bought this land in 1985, supposedly as a hunting retreat. He'd built the cabin himself, a modest A-frame structure with a wraparound deck and a view of the valley below. I'd spent summers here as a kid, fishing with Tommy in the creek, roasting marshmallows over campfires, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts while Dad watched with rare approval. Now I understood why he'd really built this place. Not for family memories, for a prison. Turn here, I said, recognizing a faded trail marker. Sarah killed the headlights and slowed to a crawl. The last thing we needed was to announce our arrival. The cabin emerged from the trees like a ghost-weathered gray wood, windows dark, the deck sagging under years of neglect. It looked abandoned. It looked innocent. It looked like a lie. We parked 50 yards back and approached on foot. Lisa took point, her hand resting on her weapon. Sarah flanked left. I moved straight toward the back of the cabin, where my mother's letter said the bunker door would be. The hillside behind the cabin was overgrown with brush and fallen branches, natural camouflage that had been carefully maintained. But I knew what to look for now. A slight depression in the earth, a patch where the vegetation grew differently, the outline of something man-made, buried beneath decades of concealment. I found the door in less than 5 minutes. It was steel, painted to match the surrounding earth, set into a concrete frame that had been built directly into the hillside. A heavy padlock secured the handle, rusted, but solid. "This is it," I whispered. Sarah and Lisa gathered behind me. I could hear their breathing, quick and shallow. My own heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. I pulled out the key. The lock resisted at first, 25 years of rust and neglect fighting against the mechanism. I twisted harder, felt something give, and heard a click that echoed through the silent forest like a gunshot. The door swung open. A smell hit me first, stale air, human waste, something sour and rotten that made my stomach lurch. Then darkness, absolute and complete, swallowing the beam of my flashlight like a hungry mouth. "Stay here," I said to Sarah and Lisa. "Call for backup if I'm not out in 10 minutes. David, please." I didn't wait for a response. I stepped into the darkness and descended. The stairs were concrete, steep, slick with moisture that had seeped through the earth over decades. 15 steps down, maybe 20. I lost count somewhere in the middle, my flashlight beam bouncing off walls that seemed to close in with every step. At the bottom, a corridor, short, narrow, ending in another door. This one was unlocked. I pushed it open and found my brother. The room was exactly as Dr. Whitmore had described, 15 by 15 feet. Concrete walls, a single light bulb hanging from a wire. A cot in the corner, sheets gray with age and use. A bucket that I refused to look at directly. A small table with books. A radio. Empty food containers. And Tommy, he was sitting on the cot, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. For a terrible moment, I thought I was too late, that he died alone in this hole while I was piecing together clues just miles away. Then he opened his eyes. They were the same eyes I remembered, dark, brown, intelligent, haunted, but everything else had changed. His hair was long and gray, his beard tangled and unkempt. His skin was pale as paper, stretched tight over bones that protruded at sharp angles. His legs were thin as sticks beneath the threadbare sweatpants, muscles atrophied from decades of confinement. A chain ran from his ankle to a bolt in the wall. Just as Whitmore had said. Said, "Tommy," I whispered. He stared at me. No recognition, no reaction, just nothing. "Tommy, it's me. It's David." Something flickered in his eyes. A spark of memory fighting through years of isolation and despair. "David?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible, as if he'd forgotten how to speak. "David's gone. David left." I came back. I crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside the cot, tears streaming down my face. I came back. "Tommy, I'm here. I'm going to get you out." He reached out with a trembling hand and touched my face. His fingers were cold, thin, the bones sharp beneath papery skin. "Real," he whispered. "You're real. I'm real. I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." Tommy's face crumpled. 25 years of suffering, 25 years of waiting, 25 years of hoping that someone would come. All of it breaking through the wall he'd built to survive. He collapsed against me, sobbing, his frail body shaking with emotions too powerful to contain. I held him. My brother. My protector. The boy who'd taken beatings so I wouldn't have to. The man who'd tried to do the right thing and been buried alive for it. "I've got you," I said. Over and over. "I've got you. It's over. It's finally over." It took 20 minutes to find the bolt cutters in the cabin's tool shed and free Tommy from the chain. His ankle was scarred, layers of tissue built up over years of the metal rubbing against skin, but he didn't seem to notice. He was too busy staring at the sky. Sarah and Lisa helped me carry him up the stairs. He weighed almost nothing, maybe 100 pounds, if that. When we emerged into the morning light, he flinched and covered his eyes, the sun too bright after decades of darkness. "It's okay," I said. Tommy lowered his hands slowly. He looked at the trees, the mountains, the cabin where our father had imprisoned him for a quarter of his life. "He's dead," Tommy said quietly. "Dad, I felt it. 3 months ago. The door didn't open. No food came. I knew. I'm sorry it took so long to find you." Tommy turned to look at me, really look at me for the first time. "You came," he said. "That's all that matters." He was wrong. It wasn't all that mattered. Justice mattered. Truth mattered. Making sure the people who'd allowed this to happen faced consequences for their complicity. But those were problems for later. Right now, my brother needed sunlight and fresh air, and the knowledge that his nightmare was finally, truly, over. "Let's go home," I said. We took Tommy to Sarah's cabin. It was the safest place we knew, isolated, off the grid, unknown to Frank Morrison and his network. Lisa called in sick for her shift, knowing that her absence would raise questions, but deciding the risk was worth it. Tommy slept for 18 hours straight. When he finally woke, it was past midnight. I was sitting in a chair beside his bed, watching him breathe, afraid that if I looked away, he might disappear back into the darkness that had swallowed him for so long. His eyes opened slowly. For a moment, panic flashed across his face, the disorientation of waking somewhere unfamiliar after 25 years in the same concrete box. Then he saw me, and the panic faded. "Still real," he whispered. "Still real." Sarah brought soup, chicken broth, nothing heavy. Dr. Whitmore's instructions relayed through a burner phone. Tommy's stomach wouldn't be able to handle solid food yet. 25 years of processed rations and vitamin supplements had left his digestive system as damaged as the rest of him. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful like it was the finest meal he'd ever tasted. "I'd forgotten," he said between bites. "Forgotten what real food tasted like, what choices felt like." He looked at the bowl in his hands. He gave me the same thing every week: canned beans, dried fruit, protein bars. Enough to survive, never enough to feel human. "You don't have to talk about it," I said. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. I've been ready for 25 years." Tommy set down the bowl and met my eyes. "I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, David. 10,000. Imagining someone would find me. And imagining someone would find me. Imagining I'd finally get to tell the truth." His voice hardened. "I need to tell it, before Morrison or the sheriff or anyone else tries to bury it again." I pulled out my phone. "Can I record this? Record everything. I want the whole world to know what Bill Chen really was." Tommy's voice was stronger now, fueled by years of suppressed rage. It started in September 1999. I was student teaching at the elementary school, but I still helped out at the mine on weekends, filing paperwork, running errands, whatever Dad needed. He liked having family around. Made him look good to the workers. He paused, gathering himself. One Saturday, I was in his office looking for invoice forms. I opened the wrong drawer and found a folder labeled Shaft 7 Confidential. Inside was a safety report I'd never seen before. Robert Henley's original assessment, the one that recommended shutdown. I said, "You know about that? Sarah's been investigating for 25 years." She found the falsified version. Tommy nodded slowly. The original was worse than you can imagine. Henley didn't just recommend shutdown. He predicted catastrophic failure within 60 days if mining continued. He used words like imminent collapse and certain casualties. He begged Dad to evacuate immediately, but Dad needed to meet the contract deadline, $2 million. Tommy's jaw tightened. That's what 12 lives were worth to our father. $2 million, and his reputation as a man who always delivered. He continued. I confronted him that night, showed him the report, told him I was going to the state attorney general, first thing Monday morning. He tried to talk me out of it, offered me money, a partnership in the company, anything I wanted. When I refused, he got quiet. That was scarier than his anger. What happened next? He asked me to come to the mine the next morning. Said he wanted to show me the improvements he'd made. Prove that Henley was overreacting. I was stupid enough to believe him. Tommy's hands trembled. When I got there, the place was empty. No workers, no equipment, nothing. Just Dad and Frank Morrison, waiting by the entrance to Shaft 7. Frank was there? Frank was always there. Dad's shadow, his enforcer. Tommy's voice dropped. They grabbed me before I could react, dragged me into the shaft and beat me until I couldn't stand. Then they left me there, chained to a support beam, while they rigged the explosives. I felt the blood drain from my face. Explosives? The collapse wasn't natural, David. It wasn't geological failure. Dad and Frank planted charges throughout Shaft 7 and detonated them at 2:47 p.m., while 12 men were working inside. Tommy's eyes were hollow. I heard it happen, felt the ground shake, heard the screams cut off so fast, like someone had flipped a switch. Then, silence. Just dust and darkness, and the sound of settling rock. The room was completely still. Sarah had stopped breathing. Lisa's hand had moved to cover her mouth. They came back for me that night. Tommy continued. I thought they were going to kill me, finish the job, bury me with the others. But Dad had a different idea. Thanks for watching. This for Mager the place and clicking the man. He said killing his own son would haunt him forever. But keeping me alive, keeping me silent, keeping me as insurance against anyone who might dig too deep. He laughed bitterly. That was something he could live with. Insurance? If anyone got too close to the truth, Dad could produce me as evidence that Tommy Chen was alive and well, just estranged from the family. Or he could threaten to frame me for the explosion he had, my fingerprints on those documents. After all, I'd look like a disgruntled son who'd murdered 12 innocent men. Tommy's voice cracked. He had me in a box, David. Literally and figuratively. And he kept me there for 25 years. I thought about my father's letter, his confession, his final request. He felt guilty, I said quietly. At the end, he wanted me to find you. Guilt is easy when you're dying. Tommy's eyes blazed with sudden fury. Guilt doesn't bring back Miguel Rodriguez or Joseph Whitehorse or any of the other men he murdered. Guilt doesn't give me back the life he stole. Guilt doesn't mean a goddamn thing. He was right. Of course he was right. What about evidence? I asked. Henley's original report, do you know where it is? Dad kept everything. He was paranoid about destroying documents, always worried something might come back to bite him if he didn't have leverage. There's a safe in the mine office. Combination is Mom's birthday. The 14th of June, 2052. Everything's in there. Reports, payoff records, photographs of the charges being planted. Tommy met my eyes. Enough to put Frank Morrison away for life. Enough to reopen every case Sheriff Tanner ever buried. Enough to burn this whole rotten town to the ground. I stood up. Then that's exactly what we're going to do. Tommy didn't sleep again that night. Neither did I. We sat on Sarah's porch, wrapped in blankets against the mountain cold, watching stars that Tommy hadn't seen in a quarter century. He kept tilting his head back, staring upward, as if afraid the sky might disappear. Tell me about it, I said quietly. If you want to, tell me how you survived. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, recounting memories he'd kept locked away for survival. The first year was the hardest. I screamed until my voice gave out. I clawed at the walls until my fingernails tore off. I tried to break the chains so many times I still have fractures that never healed properly. He held up his hands, gnarled, scarred, the bones slightly misaligned. I wanted to die, David. Every single day, I prayed for death. But you didn't. I came close. Twice. He pulled back his sleeve, revealing faded scars on his wrist. The first time, I used a piece of the food can. Cut too shallow, bled everywhere, but didn't hit the artery. Dad found out. After that, everything came in plastic containers. I felt sick. My brother had tried to kill himself in that hole. And our father's response was to remove the means, not to show mercy, not to release him, but to ensure his prisoner couldn't escape through death. The second time was worse, Tommy continued. Year 3, I'd stopped eating, decided to starve myself, got down to maybe 90 pounds before Dr. Whitmore showed up with an IV and force-fed me nutrients for 2 weeks straight. His jaw tightened. That's when I realized they'd never let me die. Dad needed me alive. So, I had to find another way to survive. Routine, structure, anything to make the days feel different from each other. Tommy stared at his hands. I did push-ups as many as I could with the chain. I counted seconds, minutes, hours. I recited everything I could remember. Books, songs, conversations, the periodic table, state capitals. I built a world inside my head because the real world had been taken from me. He paused, his voice softening. Dr. Whitmore helped. More than he probably knows. He brought books. Started in year 2, just a few at first, then more. Said it was to keep my mind active, prevent deterioration. But I think, Tommy's voice cracked, I think it was the only kindness he could offer. His way of apologizing without words. What did you read? Everything. History, philosophy, science, fiction. I read War and Peace 6 times. The complete works of Shakespeare, cover to cover. Every book on psychology and survival I could get. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I became the most well-read prisoner in Montana. Maybe in the country. Did you ever talk to Whitmore? Really? Talk? Sometimes. In the early years, he was terrified, barely said a word. Just did his medical checks and left. But around year 10, something changed. He started staying longer, asking questions, telling me about the outside world. Tommy looked up at the stars again. He told me when Mom died, 2015. He cried when he said it. I think that was the first time I realized he saw me as a person, not just a project. His voice hardened, but he never let me out. No matter how much guilt he carried, he never unlocked that chain. Fear. I know. I understand it now. Dad had him trapped almost as completely as me, just a different kind of prison. Tommy shook his head. But understanding isn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We sat in silence for a while. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, indifferent to human suffering. When did you stop hoping? I asked. Tommy turned to look at me, his eyes ancient in his prematurely aged face. Year 15, 2014. What happened? Nothing happened. That was the point. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. 15 years of waiting. 15 years of imagining rescue, someone finding the bunker by accident, the police investigating, you coming home and asking the right questions. And none of it happened. Ever. His voice was hollow, mechanical. I realized no one was looking. The world had moved on. Tommy Chen was dead, buried in an empty casket, mourned and forgotten. I was just existing, taking up space in a hole no one knew about. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't. Don't. Tommy cut me off, but his voice was gentle. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. And honestly, if you'd come looking in those early years, Dad would have killed you too. Or worse, put you in a bunker of your own. The thought made my blood run cold. After year 15, I stopped hoping for rescue, Tommy continued. Instead, I started hoping for death. Not mine, Dad's. I figured eventually his heart would give out, or he'd get in a car accident, or someone would murder him in a business deal gone wrong. And when that happened, someone would find me, or I'd finally get to die in peace. And 3 months ago, the door didn't open. Tommy's voice was barely audible. For the first time in 25 years, Dad didn't come on his monthly visit. No food, no Whitmore, nothing. I knew something had changed. I just didn't know what. The generator was running low. I watched the light get dimmer every day. counted the hours until it would go out completely, made peace with dying in the dark. He turned to face me fully, and then yesterday, I heard footsteps, the lock turning, the door opening. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. I thought it was a hallucination. I'd had them before, visions of rescue that dissolved into nothing. But then you walked in. You said my name. You touched my face. His voice broke completely. And for the first time in 25 years, hope wasn't a lie. I pulled my brother into my arms. He clung to me like a drowning man, grasping a lifeline, fragile and fierce, and desperate to believe this moment was real. I'm going to make this right, I said into his hair. I'm going to make sure every person who did this to you pays for what they've done. I'm going to tell your story to the whole world. Tommy pulled back, his eyes red but burning with something that looked almost like hunger. Then let's finish it, he said. The Chen Mining Company headquarters had been abandoned since 2005. When the last profitable shaft was exhausted and Dad finally closed operations, the building sat on the edge of town like a rotting monument to better days, brick walls stained with rust, windows shattered by vandals. The company logo faded to an illegible ghost. Lisa and I approached at 2 a.m., dressed in dark clothes, moving through shadows. Sarah stayed with Tommy at the cabin. He was still too weak to travel, and we couldn't risk him being seen. Security? I whispered. None. Budget cuts killed the overnight guard 5 years ago. Lisa tested the side door. Locked, but the frame was rotted. One solid kick, and it swung open. Frank Morrison probably figured no one would bother breaking into an empty building. He figured wrong. The interior smelled of mold and decay. Our flashlight beams cut through darkness thick with dust, illuminating overturned desks, scattered papers, equipment left to rust. 20 years of neglect had transformed my father's empire into a graveyard. His office was on the second floor. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, and inside, time had stopped. Dad's massive oak desk still dominated the room. His leather chair cracked with age, his awards and photographs still hanging on walls, spotted with water damage. The safe was exactly where Tommy said it would be, built into the floor behind the desk, concealed by a rug that disintegrated when I pulled it aside. The 14th of June, 2052. I muttered, spinning the dial. Mom's birthday. Even in his darkest secrets, Dad had used our mother as his key. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was a lifetime of sins. Files. Dozens of them. Yellowed with age, but preserved in waterproof sleeves. As if Dad had known someday they might be needed. I pulled them out one by one, my hands trembling. Robert Henley's original safety report, the real one, stamped urgent, predicting catastrophic failure. A handwritten note from Dad to Frank Morrison. Handle this. Budget $50K. Bank records showing the payoff. Photographs of Henley meeting with Dad and Frank outside the county assessor's office. Jesus Christ. Lisa breathed. Looking over my shoulder, there was more. So much more. A schematic of Shaft 7, with red circles marking charge placement points. Receipts for industrial explosives purchased under a shell company name. A timeline written in Dad's handwriting. October 15, 2:47 p.m. detonation. Ensure all personnel in position. He planned it down to the minute, I said, my voice hollow. He knew exactly when those men would be in that shaft, and he blew it up anyway. Lisa photographed everything with her phone, creating backups in case something happened to the originals. Her face was pale, her jaw set with barely contained fury. At the bottom of the safe, I found one more folder. This one was thicker than the others, bound with a rubber band that snapped when I touched it. Inside were payoff records. Decades of them. Sheriff Buck Tanner, $5,000 per month since November 1999. Frank Morrison, profit sharing from the insurance settlement. Asked. Pastor Gregory Walsh, donations to Street Patrick's Church in exchange for community management. Harold Patterson, legal fees, plus a substantial retainer for ensuring the will conditions couldn't be easily challenged. The whole town, Lisa said. He bought the whole goddamn town, not the whole town. I stuffed the files into the duffel bag we'd brought. Just the people who mattered. The ones with power. The ones who could keep secrets buried. A sound from downstairs froze us both. Footsteps. Multiple sets. And voices low, angry, getting closer. They're here, Lisa hissed, drawing her weapon. Someone must have seen us. I zipped the duffel and slung it over my shoulder. Backstairs? Collapsed years ago. Only way out is through them. Or, she looked at the window. How do you feel about a 2-story drop? Better than a bullet. We moved fast. Lisa went first, easing the window open while I covered the door. The voices were on the stairs now. Frank Morrison's gravelly bark, unmistakable among them. Find them. They're not leaving this building with those files. Lisa dropped from the window, landing in a crouch on the overgrown grass below. I tossed her the duffel, then swung my legs over the sill. The office door burst open just as I let go. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my ankle, but adrenaline carried me forward. Lisa grabbed my arm and hauled me upright. We ran, limping, stumbling, desperate toward the tree line 50 yards away. Behind us, shouting. A flashlight beam swept across the grass, missing us by inches. Then a gunshot. The bullet hit a tree trunk 2 feet from my head, spraying bark into my face. I ducked instinctively, nearly falling, but Lisa's grip kept me moving. "Don't stop," she yelled. "We're almost there!" Another shot. Another miss. Frank Morrison's men were shooting blind, unable to see us clearly in the darkness. We plunged into the forest. Branches whipped my face. Roots grabbed at my feet. My lungs burned and my ankles screamed. But I didn't slow down, couldn't slow down until we reached the car hidden a quarter mile away. Lisa threw the duffel in the back and started the engine before I'd even closed my door. We tore down the mountain road, headlights off, navigating by moonlight and desperation. They saw us. I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. They know we have the files. Good. Lisa's voice was ice. That means they're scared. Scared people make mistakes. I clutched the duffel bag, 25 years of evidence, 25 years of truth, finally brought into the light. What now? I asked. Now we make copies. We send them to every news outlet, every law enforcement agency, every person who might listen. Lisa's eyes never left the road. And then we call the FBI, because this just became way bigger than one dirty sheriff can handle. I looked back at the darkness we'd escaped. Somewhere behind us, Frank Morrison was realizing that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. Tomorrow, Stone Creek would finally face its sins. We made it back to Sarah's cabin just before dawn. The files were spread across her kitchen table within minutes. Lisa, photographing. Sarah scanning. Both uploading copies to secure cloud servers. Within 2 hours, the evidence existed in a dozen different locations, impossible to suppress no matter what happened next. FBI field office in Billings, Lisa said, ending a phone call. 6 hours is a long time, I said. It's the best we've got. I told them everything, the falsified reports, the deliberate explosion, the 25 years of imprisonment, the payoff network. They're taking it seriously. She paused. They're also sending a protective detail, but that won't arrive until the agents do. Tommy sat in the corner, watching us work. He'd insisted on being present, on seeing the evidence that had cost him his life. His face was unreadable, but his hands hadn't stopped shaking since we'd shown him the explosion schematics. So we wait, he said quietly. We wait, I confirmed. 6 hours. Then this is over. The attack came at 8:47 a.m. I heard the vehicles first, multiple engines, approaching fast on the dirt road that led to Sarah's property. Then, voices, shouting orders. Then the crack of a rifle shot that shattered the kitchen window and buried itself in the wall 3 inches from Sarah's head. "Down!" Lisa screamed, drawing her weapon. "Everyone down!" We hit the floor as more shots punched through the walls. I grabbed Tommy and dragged him behind the overturned kitchen table. Pitiful cover, but better than nothing. Through the broken window, I counted 4 vehicles. Sheriff's Department cruisers, Frank Morrison's black pickup, and a van I didn't recognize, its doors already open, men with rifles pouring out. "How many?" I shouted to Lisa. 10, maybe 12. She fired 2 shots through the window, forcing the attackers to take cover. Too many. "Back door," Sarah yelled from the bedroom. "There's a trail through the woods. Leads to an old logging road half a mile east. They'll have it covered. Maybe not." She appeared with the shotgun, her face pale but determined. "It's our only chance." Lisa laid down covering fire while we moved. Tommy could barely walk. His legs hadn't carried him more than a few steps in 25 years, so I half dragged, half carried him toward the back door. Sarah led the way, shotgun ready. We burst into the morning air and ran. The forest swallowed us. Pine trees, dense undergrowth, terrain that would slow our pursuers as much as it slowed us. Behind us, I heard shouting. They'd discovered we were gone. We're organizing pursuit. Tommy's breathing was ragged, his weight heavy against my shoulder. "Leave me," he gasped. "I'm slowing you down." "Not a chance." "David." I said no. I adjusted my grip and pushed harder. "I didn't spend 25 years looking for you just to abandon you now." Sarah led us through the trees with the confidence of someone who'd walked these woods 1,000 times. Lisa brought up the rear, her weapon trained on the shadows behind us. For 10 minutes, 15, we moved without incident. Then the trail split. "Left goes to the logging road," Sarah said, breathing hard. "We take left," Lisa said. "Get to the road, flag down a car. Get the hell out of here." A gunshot cut her off. She spun, clutching her shoulder, and dropped to one knee. "Lisa!" I started toward her, but she waved me off. "I'm fine." Through and through. Blood seeped between her fingers, but her voice was steady. "Go. Take the left path. I'll hold them here." "You can't. I can buy you time." "That's what matters." She met my eyes, her gaze fierce. "Get Tommy to the FBI. Get the truth out. That's the only thing that matters now." More shots. Closer. I could hear men crashing through the undergrowth, hunting us like animals. "Go," Lisa said again. Sarah grabbed my arm. "She's right. We have to move." I looked at Lisa, this woman I'd known for 3 days, who'd risked everything to help a stranger uncover the truth. She nodded once, then turned toward the approaching sounds. Weapon raised. We ran. The logging road was exactly where Sarah said it would be. A rutted dirt track, barely wide enough for a vehicle, disappearing into the mountains. "Now what?" Tommy asked, his voice hollow. Before I could answer, engines roared behind us. 2 trucks burst from the tree line, cutting off our retreat. Frank Morrison stepped out of the first one, a rifle in his hands and murder in his eyes. "End of the line, David." Sheriff Tanner emerged from the second truck, flanked by 2 deputies. They spread out, forming a semicircle, trapping us against the mountain. "You should have stayed in Portland," Morrison said, walking toward us slowly. "Should have taken your inheritance and forgotten this town ever existed. But no, you had to dig. You had to ask questions. You had to find Tommy. And now the FBI has all your evidence," I said. "Copies everywhere. Kill us, and it won't change anything. The truth is already out." Morrison's face twisted. "The truth is whatever the survivors say it is. And there aren't going to be any survivors." He raised his rifle. I stepped in front of Tommy, shielding him with my body. 25 years too late, but I wasn't going to let my brother die. Not now. Not after everything. "Any last words?" Morrison asked. I heard it before I saw it, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. Morrison heard it too. His head snapped toward the sky, his face draining of color. What the? The helicopter crested the ridge, black and official, FBI letters emblazoned on its side. Behind it, sirens, dozens of them echoing up the mountain road. Lisa had gotten through. The cavalry had arrived. Morrison's rifle wavered. His men exchanged panicked glances. Tanner was already backing toward his truck, survival instinct overriding loyalty. "It's over, Frank," I said quietly. "Put down the gun." For a long moment, he didn't move. The helicopter descended, kicking up dust and debris. Armed agents rappelled down, weapons trained on Morrison and his men. Then, slowly, Frank Morrison lowered his rifle and let it fall to the ground. The next 30 minutes were chaos. FBI agents swarmed the logging road like black-clad locusts, securing weapons, forcing Morrison's men to their knees, barking orders that echoed off the mountain walls. Frank Morrison stood frozen as an agent twisted his arms behind his back and clicked handcuffs into place, the same hands that had helped plant explosives in Shaft 7, that had signed payoff checks, that had reached for a rifle to silence us forever. "Frank Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, false imprisonment, obstruction of justice, and racketeering." The agent's voice was flat, professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Morrison said nothing. His eyes found mine across the chaos, and I saw something I'd never expected. Defeat. Total, absolute defeat. 25 years of carefully constructed lies, crumbling in seconds. Sheriff Buck Tanner tried to run. He made it maybe 10 feet before two agents tackled him, driving him face first into the dirt. His badge glinted in the morning sun as they hauled him upright, a symbol of authority that had been corrupted for a quarter century. "I didn't know," Tanner screamed. "I didn't know about the boy. Morrison never told me." "Save it for your lawyer," the agent said, shoving him toward a waiting vehicle. I held Tommy upright, his frail body trembling against mine. He watched the arrests with an expression I couldn't read, satisfaction, maybe, or disbelief that the men who'd enabled his imprisonment were finally facing consequences. "It's real," he whispered. "This is actually happening. It's real." I confirmed. "It's finally real." They found Lisa 20 minutes later. She'd taken cover behind a fallen log, her shoulder wound bleeding but controlled. She'd managed to take down 2 of Morrison's men before running out of ammunition, one with a bullet to the leg, one with a blow to the head from her empty pistol. Both were alive. Both were in custody. The paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher while she protested that she could walk, that she was fine, that they should focus on Tommy instead. "You got shot," I said, walking beside her as they carried her toward the helicopter. "Flesh wound." She grimaced as the stretcher jostled. "I've had worse paper cuts. You saved our lives. I did my job." But she smiled a tired, pained smile that held more warmth than I'd seen from her since we met. "Besides, I've been wanting to arrest Frank Morrison since my first week in this town. Just needed the right excuse." They airlifted her to Billings General Hospital. The last thing I saw was her giving me a thumbs up through the helicopter window. Tommy's statement took 4 hours. We sat in Sarah's cabin, now a crime scene, but the FBI had cleared a room for interviews while he recounted everything. The safety report, the confrontation with our father, the beating at the mine, the explosion he'd heard from inside Shaft 7, 25 years in a concrete box. The lead agent, a woman named Diane Torres, listened without interrupting. Her face remained professionally neutral, but I saw her hands tighten on her pen when Tommy described the chain around his ankle, the bucket in the corner, the years of isolation that had nearly broken him. When he finished, she closed her notebook and looked at him with something approaching reverence. "Mr. Chen, I've been with the Bureau for 22 years. I've investigated serial killers, terrorist cells, international trafficking rings." She shook her head slowly. "I've never heard anything like this. Will it be enough?" Tommy asked. To convict them, more than enough. The evidence you helped us recover, combined with your testimony, will put Morrison and the others away for the rest of their lives. She paused. We're also reopening the investigation into the 12 miners who died. Their families deserve to know the truth. I thought of Sarah, of Miguel Rodriguez, who'd been dead for 25 years because my father cared more about money than human life. Yes, I said. They do. Word spread through Stone Creek like wildfire. By noon, the arrests were the only thing anyone was talking about. Frank Morrison, pillar of the community, council chair, the man who'd controlled this town for decades, led away in handcuffs. Sheriff Tanner, the lawman everyone trusted, exposed as a corrupt puppet. Pastor Walsh, taken from the rectory in front of his congregation. Harold Patterson, the attorney who'd enabled my father's schemes, found hiding in his office closet. The town gathered on Main Street, watching as their leaders were loaded into federal vehicles and driven away. Some faces showed shock, others showed anger. A few the families who'd lost loved ones in the mine, who'd always suspected but could never prove, showed something that looked like vindication. Elena Rodriguez was among them. The widow, whose husband Miguel had died in Shaft 7. She stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her face, clutching a photograph of a man who'd been gone for a quarter century. I walked toward her. She saw me coming and didn't look away. It was deliberate, I said quietly. The collapse. My father planned it. Murdered them for money. She nodded slowly. I always knew. Everybody knew. We just couldn't prove it. Expand. We don't. Follow A. You can now. The FBI has everything. Safety reports, payoff records, the whole conspiracy. I took a breath. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what my family did to yours. Elena reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Your family did this, she said, but you ended it. You brought the truth back from the grave. She looked toward the federal vehicles, now disappearing down the road. Miguel can finally rest. They all can. I squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Behind me, Tommy emerged from Sarah's car, supported by a paramedic. The townspeople turned to stare this ghost, this legend, this man who'd been dead for 25 years. Tommy looked at the crowd, at the town that had forgotten him, at the mountains that had been his prison. Then he lifted his face to the sun and closed his eyes. He was free. The trials began 3 months later. Federal prosecutors charged Frank Morrison with 12 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 25 counts of false imprisonment, and enough conspiracy charges to fill a phone book. His defense attorney, a high-priced lawyer from Billings, who'd clearly never handled a case this damning, tried to argue diminished capacity, coercion by Bill Chen, even temporary insanity. The jury didn't buy any of it. I sat in the courtroom every day, watching the man who'd helped destroy my family face the consequences of his choices. Morrison aged visibly over the 6-week trial, his shoulders slumping, his face going gray, the arrogance draining out of him like water from a cracked vessel. Tommy testified on day 12. The courtroom went silent when they wheeled him in. He'd gained weight in the months since his rescue, physical therapy and proper nutrition, slowly rebuilding what 25 years of captivity had stolen, but he still looked fragile. Ancient. A man who'd lived through something no human should ever experience. The prosecutor's questions were gentle, methodical. Tommy's answers were devastating. Can you describe the room where you were held, Mr. Chen? 15 feet by 15 feet. Concrete walls. 1 light bulb. A cot. A bucket. Tommy's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. No windows. No natural light. I went years without seeing the sun, and the chain attached to my ankle. Long enough to reach the cot and the bucket. Not long enough to reach the door. He paused. I tried to break it. For the first 5 years, I tried every day. Eventually, did you ever see the defendant during your imprisonment? 3 times. The day I was taken, Once in 2007, when the generator needed repairs, and once in 2015, when Tommy's voice cracked. When my mother died, he came to tell me, said he thought I'd want to know. The jury foreman was crying. Half the gallery was crying. Even the judge looked shaken. Did the defendant ever express remorse for what he'd done? Tommy looked directly at Frank Morrison. Their eyes met across the courtroom. No, Tommy said quietly. He told me I'd brought it on myself, that if I'd just kept my mouth shut, none of this would have happened. Morrison looked away first. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty. All counts. The judge sentenced Frank Morrison to 12 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 200 years, a number so large it was almost meaningless, except as a symbol. He would die in prison. He would never see freedom again. Sheriff Buck Tanner received 40 years. He'd cooperated with prosecutors, providing testimony that helped convict Morrison. But the judge made clear that cooperation couldn't erase 25 years of corruption. Pastor Gregory Walsh got 15 years for obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Harold Patterson received 10 years and was permanently disbarred. The two deputies who'd participated in the attack on Sarah's cabin each received 8 years. Dr. Henry Whitmore's case was more complicated. He'd turned himself in the day after the FBI arrived, providing a full confession and decades of medical records documenting Tommy's imprisonment. His testimony had been crucial to the prosecution without his detailed notes. Proving the timeline of Tommy's captivity would have been far more difficult. The prosecutor argued for leniency. Tommy, in a statement that surprised everyone, asked the court to consider the impossible position Whitmore had been placed in. "He kept me alive," Tommy said. "For 25 years, he was the only human contact I had. He brought me books. He treated my infections. He told me about my mother's death because he thought I deserved to know." Tommy paused. "I'm not ready to forgive him. I may never be ready, but I understand why he did what he did. Fear makes cowards of us all. Guy, 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 Guy." The judge sentenced Whitmore to 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3. Given his age 71 now, it might still be a death sentence. But it was mercy, of a sort. The 12 minors were officially reclassified as murder victims. A federal investigation confirmed what Tommy had witnessed. The collapse of Shaft 7 was not a geological accident, but a deliberate act of mass murder. Bill Chen and Frank Morrison had planted explosives throughout the tunnel, timing the detonation to occur when the maximum number of workers would be underground. The motive was pure greed. The contract with Montana Power and Light had a penalty clause, $500,000, for every week the delivery was late. By killing the miners and blaming the collapse on natural causes, Bill Chen had not only avoided the penalties but collected a $3.2 million insurance settlement. 12 lives, $3.2 million. Less than $270,000 per person. The families received the news in a private meeting organized by the FBI. I wasn't present, but Sarah was. She told me later that Elena Rodriguez had stood up, walked to the front of the room, and addressed the other families. For 25 years, they told us it was an accident. They told us to move on. They told us our grief was holding us back. Her voice shook with fury and vindication. They were wrong. We were right. And now, the whole world knows it. The state of Montana established a memorial fund for the victims' families, financed by the seizure of Bill Chen's assets. Each family received $400,000, not enough to replace a husband, a father, a son, but enough to acknowledge that their loss had been real, had been criminal, had been covered up by the very people sworn to protect them. The 3 miners whose bodies had never been recovered, Miguel Rodriguez, Joseph Whitehorse, and Patrick Sullivan, were finally laid to rest in a ceremony attended by hundreds. Tommy insisted on being there, standing between me and Sarah as the empty caskets were lowered into the ground. "I heard them die," he said quietly. "I heard the explosion, the screams. the silence after. He wiped his eyes. At least now, they're not alone anymore. I put my arm around my brother and held him as he wept. 25 years of silence, finally broken. 6 months after the trials ended, I fulfilled the final condition of my father's will. The 3 miners, Miguel Rodriguez, Joseph Whitehorse, and Patrick Sullivan, had been located in the deepest section of Shaft 7, preserved by the cold and the collapse that had entombed them. A specialized recovery team worked for 3 weeks to extract their remains, treating every fragment with the reverence these men had been denied for a quarter century. The funerals were held on a Saturday in October, almost exactly 26 years after their deaths. Stone Creek had never seen anything like it. Over 800 people gathered at the cemetery, families who'd lost loved ones, townspeople who'd finally learned the truth, journalists covering the story that had captivated the nation. The governor attended. 2 senators sent representatives. The FBI director delivered a statement about the importance of justice, no matter how long delayed. But the moment I remember most clearly was simpler than any of that. Elena Rodriguez stood at her husband's grave, holding the hand of a young woman I didn't recognize. When I approached, Elena introduced her. "This is Maria, Miguel's daughter." Elena's voice trembled with emotion. She was born 7 months after he died. He never got to meet her. Maria was 26 years old, the same age her father had been when he was murdered. She had his eyes, his cheekbones, the same determined set to her jaw that I'd seen in photographs. "Thank you," she said, shaking my hand. "For bringing him home." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. The inheritance was finalized 2 weeks later. Harold Patterson's replacement, a young attorney from Billings with no connection to Stone Creek's corrupt past, read the final documents in the same office where everything had begun. Pursuant to the conditions set forth in the will of William Michael Chen, and having verified completion of all requirements, I hereby certify that David Michael Chen is entitled to the full inheritance, valued at approximately $5.1 million. I signed, where indicated. Tommy, as a witness, signed beside me. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked afterward. As we walked through town, "I've been thinking about that." I stopped in front of the Chen Mining Company building, still abandoned, still rotting, but somehow different now. This town was built on Dad's money, his crimes, his lies. I think it's time to build something else. I'd already talked to Sarah about the plan. The Chen Family Foundation would fund scholarships for the children of mining families. It would establish a memorial museum documenting the 1999 disaster and its aftermath. It would provide medical care for survivors of workplace accidents, legal aid for families seeking justice, and resources for whistleblowers afraid to speak up. The Foundation's first project, converting the abandoned mine office into a community center. From a place of secrets to a place of gathering, Sarah had said when I'd proposed the idea. "I like it." Tommy smiled a real smile, something I'd rarely seen since his rescue. "Dad would have hated that." "I know. That's part of why I'm doing it." Tommy's recovery was slow but steady. The physical damage from 25 years of confinement would never fully heal. His muscles remained weak despite months of therapy. His eyesight had deteriorated beyond correction. He walked with a cane now, each step a small victory over the darkness that had tried to consume him. But his mind, his spirit, was stronger than ever. He'd started writing a memoir, documenting everything he'd experienced. Not for publication, he insisted, just for himself. A way of processing trauma too vast for any therapy to contain. I spent 25 years with nothing but my thoughts. He told me one evening, as we sat on the porch of the family home, I might as well put them to good use. He'd also reconnected with the world he'd missed. He binged 25 years of movies, marveling at CGI and streaming services. He discovered smartphones and spent hours video calling people he'd never met, just to hear human voices. He read newspapers obsessively, catching up on history that had happened without him. "The Berlin Wall fell," he said one day, genuinely astonished. "While I was in that bunker, The entire Soviet Union collapsed.
Can
Can you imagine? I couldn't. I couldn't imagine any of what he'd endured. But I was learning, slowly, how to be his brother again. Sarah and I didn't plan for it to happen. We'd spent so much time together during the investigation, the trials, the aftermath, that something had grown between us without either of us noticing. One night, sitting on her porch, watching the stars, she reached over and took my hand. "What happens now?" she asked. "I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. You could go back to Portland, resume your career, pretend this was all just research for your next book." I could. I turned to look at her. "But I'm not going to." She raised an eyebrow. "No, Stone Creek needs people who care about the truth, people who won't let the past stay buried." I squeezed her hand. "Besides, I've got 25 years of missed time with my brother, and there's this journalist I've been meaning to get to know better." Sarah laughed a sound I'd grown to love. "That's the worst line I've ever heard. Is it working?" She leaned over and kissed me. Soft, brief, full of promise. "It's working," she admitted. The Chen family home was too large for one person, too full of ghosts for comfortable living. But I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Instead, I converted the first floor into a meeting space for the foundation. Tommy took the master bedroom. He'd earned the right to the best room in the house. I claimed my childhood bedroom, smaller but filled with memories that weren't all painful. We ate dinner together every night. Sometimes Sarah joined us. Sometimes Lisa, fully recovered from her shoulder wound and promoted to interim sheriff while the county searched for a permanent replacement. Sometimes Elena Rodriguez or James Whitehorse, finally sober, finally at peace, or others who'd been touched by the tragedy and its aftermath. The house that had held so many secrets became a place of gathering, of healing, of second chances. Just as I'd hoped, 1 year after I returned to Stone Creek, I sat down to write the story. Not a true crime book, I'd written enough of those, documented enough other people's tragedies while ignoring my own. This was something different. A memoir, a confession, a record of what happens when silence becomes a prison and truth becomes the only key. Tommy found me on the porch one evening. Laptop open, cursor blinking on a blank page. "Having trouble?" he asked, lowering himself into the chair beside me. "I don't know how to start. I've written 6 books about other people's darkest moments. But this," I gestured at the screen, "this is different. Because it's yours. Because it's ours." Tommy was quiet for a moment, watching the sun set over the mountains that had held him captive for so long. He'd gained more weight now, filled out enough that he almost looked like the brother I remembered from 1999. Almost. "Start with the letter," he said, finally. "Which one?" "Dad's. The one that brought you back." He turned to look at me. That's where everything changed. That's where the silence finally broke. I thought about it. The cream-colored envelope, the legal boilerplate, the 3 words that had haunted me across 1,000 miles. Find Tommy. Why did he do it? I asked a question I'd been carrying for months. Why leave the confession? Why give me the key? He could have let you die in that bunker, and no one would ever have known. Tommy considered the question carefully. He'd had more time to think about our father than anyone. 25 years of nothing but time. "I think he wanted to be stopped," Tommy said slowly. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down, in whatever was left of his conscience, he knew what he'd done was monstrous. He just couldn't bring himself to confess while he was alive. He paused, so he left the truth for someone else to find. Someone who might be brave enough to do what he couldn't. That's a lot of faith to put in a son he barely knew. Maybe. Or maybe he knew you better than you think. Tommy smiled, still rare, still precious. You spent your whole career uncovering other people's secrets. He knew that eventually you'd uncover his. I wrote for 3 months. Every morning, every evening, sometimes through the night when sleep wouldn't come. I wrote about the letter that started everything, about returning to a town that wanted me gone, about Frank Morrison's threats and the will's impossible conditions. I wrote about Mom's hidden message and Dr. Whitmore's guilt and the moment I opened that bunker door and saw my brother for the first time in 25 years. I wrote about Sarah, who'd spent 2 decades searching for truth and found something more. About Lisa, who'd risked everything to do the right thing. About Elena Rodriguez and James Whitehorse and all the families who'd never stopped believing that justice would come. And I wrote about Tommy, his survival, his strength, his unbreakable will to live, even when living seemed impossible. When I finished, I had 400 pages, a story that spanned 26 years, 12 murders, 1 kidnapping, and a conspiracy that had corrupted an entire town. Sarah read it first. She cried 3 times and laughed once at the part where I described my first impression of her investigation wall. "You called it a conspiracy theorist's fever dream," she said, wiping her eyes. I was wrong. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Now who's using bad lines? Tommy read it next. He took a week, processing each chapter slowly, reliving memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. "It's all true," he said when he finished. "Every word, every moment." He handed the manuscript back to me. "But you're missing the ending." "What do you mean?" "You wrote about finding me, about the trials, the justice, the aftermath, but you didn't write about what it means." He tapped the pages. "A story isn't just what happened, it's why it matters. It's what people should take away." I looked at the manuscript. 400 pages of pain, redemption, and truth. What should they take away? Tommy leaned forward, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that reminded me of the brother I'd lost and the brother I'd found. That silence kills. That secrets grow into monsters if you let them. That the truth, no matter how painful, no matter how long buried, is always worth finding. He paused. And that it's never too late. For justice, for healing, for second chances. The book was published the following spring. I titled it Silence of Stone Creek, a name that captured both what the town had hidden and what it had finally overcome. The dedication page held 3 words: for Tommy, always. It became a bestseller within 2 weeks. Not because of the writing I'd written better prose in my earlier books, but because of the story. The unimaginable cruelty of a father imprisoning his son, the 25 years of darkness, the brother who never stopped hoping and the brother who finally came home. Readers wrote to me by the thousands. Some shared their own stories of family secrets, of truths buried and finally unearthed. Others simply wanted to know that Tommy was okay, that justice had been served, that the ending was real. I answered as many as I could. Tommy answered the rest. A year after publication, we held a gathering at the Chen family home. Everyone who'd been part of the story, Sarah, Lisa, Elena, James, the families of the 12 miners, the FBI agents who'd saved our lives, even the new mayor of Stone Creek, elected on a platform of transparency and accountability. Tommy stood at the front of the room, steadier now, the cane more habit than necessity. He'd prepared a speech, but when the moment came, he set it aside. "I spent 25 years in darkness," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. 25 years believing that no one was looking for me, that the world had moved on, that I'd been forgotten. He looked at me, at Sarah, at the faces of people who'd risked everything to bring him home. I was wrong. I was never forgotten. I was just waiting to be found. He smiled. And now I'm here, standing in sunlight, surrounded by people who refuse to let the silence win. He raised his glass. To truth, to justice, to second chances, and to everyone who believes that some stories are worth fighting for. The room echoed with voices, glasses clinking. I looked around at the family I'd found, not the one I was born into, but the one I'd chosen. Sarah, beside me, her hand warm in mine. Tommy across the room, alive and laughing. Lisa and Elena and James and dozens of others, all bound together by a story that had nearly destroyed us and ultimately saved us. My father left me $5 million and a brother he'd kept in a bunker for 25 years. I used the money to build something good, and I spent the rest of my life making sure Tommy never felt alone again. If this story moved you, please remember, somewhere out there, someone is waiting to be found. A secret is waiting to be uncovered. A truth is waiting to be told. Don't let the silence win. Find them. Free them. Tell the truth. It's never too late.